Welcome to this episode of So That Reminds Me, Reminder Publishing's bi-weekly podcast discussing Western Mass news. I'm Chris Mazza.
And I'm Tyler Garnett.
And we'll be your hosts for today's episode. How we doing, Tyler?
I'm doing good. I had no complaints. There's a nice chill in the air, which is making me pretty happy.
Yeah, this is a nice time of year where the days are still getting a little bit warm, so it's nice and temperate, but the mornings have that nice little crispness to it. I'm putting a little cinnamon and nutmeg in my coffee in the morning, kind of getting in the fall mood. It's also a lot cheaper than paying for, such a drink, at a chain establishment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, the other day was the first day of fall, which is something I'm very excited for. And I think you're talking directly about some of the drinks I get from Starbucks with some pumpkin spice or some pumpkin cold foam on top. It's my favorite time of year for multiple reasons, including that drink.
Well, one thing that is a bit of a rarity for you at least is a fall with winning football, being a Jets fan. And of course, we're recording this. The Jets recently took the Patriots to the woodshed.
Yep.
And it must be nice for a Jets fan to see competent quarterback play for the first time in the history of the New York Jets, or competent quarterback play.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, I've waited decades to see the Jets beat the Patriots like that, so I enjoyed every single moment of last Thursday Night Football. I mean, a tear could have been brought to my eye of how well Aaron Rodgers looked because, like you said, I haven't seen a quarterback for the Jets that competent or make that many good plays in a long, long time. So, it kind of made me mad of all the years I was missing good quarterback play or good team play. So I definitely enjoyed every moment of that regular season win because that was the last time the Patriots lost to the Jets in MetLife was 2015. So long, long time ago.
I don't know what else I can say about that. I'm still licking my wounds a little bit. I will say that I did stay up for the entire game, which, I can at least say that I didn't quit on my team, even though they quit on me, it seems. And now let's take a look at some of the topics for this week's episode. West Springfield's teen community service trip to the Dominican Republic. Chicopee and Westover host an exercise to prepare for a hypothetical EMP attack. An MCAS question is going to be on the November ballot. The Mary Lane Hospital demolition project was put on hold. There's an Irish immigration exhibit at the Springfield Museums. But before we get into that, here are a couple of short messages.
Small businesses are the heartbeat of our communities. And at the first annual Go Local Marketplace, over 20 local makers will be bringing what they do best to brew practitioners for all to enjoy. From food trucks to live music and more, Go Local Marketplace will be your place to shop small with friends and family in tow. Go Local Marketplace will take place on Saturday, October 5th from 1 to 5 p.m. at Brew Practitioners in East Long Meadow. Parking and admission to the event is free. Bring your friends and family to Go Local Marketplace and enjoy the best of what our small business community has to offer.
We get it. You're busy, but you want to be connected to your local community. If you're not reading The Reminder, Western Mass's free weekly newspaper, you're missing out on the heartbeat of your town. Stay in the loop with all the latest buzz, from local stories to community updates and exciting events. It's all in The Reminder. Just log on to thereminder.com and dive into the hometown news you love. To subscribe to receive The Reminder at your home, call 413-788-1316. Don't miss a beat. Your town, your stories, your community for over 60 years. The Reminder. We are hometown news.
And we're back with our first topic. 10 American teenagers traveled to the Dominican Republic this past July to not only play baseball with 10 teenagers from the DR, but also to work together as teammates on a community service project. Peter Grania, a 17-year-old from West Springfield, was among the 10 students from New England selected in 2024 for a program that brings together people of different backgrounds through the common appeal of baseball and community service. The program is called Lindos Sueños, Spanish for Beautiful Dreams, and was created by the Boston Red Sox 20 years ago and is funded by the Red Sox Foundation.
For 2 weeks each summer, 20 teens work each morning on a community service project in a Dominican community in need. They spend each afternoon playing baseball at the Red Sox Dominican Academy. Greenia, a huge Red Sox fan who has been playing baseball since he was 6, said he learned about the program when he got an email from the Red Sox. He completed the application and then received an email back from the Red Sox asking him to participate in a videotaped interview. After that, Greenia got another email about a week later with a request for a Zoom interview with 3 of the program's leaders.
About a day or two later, after the interview, Greenia was formally accepted. He said a lot of the questions they asked were about why he really wanted to do this, and his reason was he enjoyed helping people, would like to get into the electrical trades, and loves baseball. From there, Greenia attended a meeting to learn more about the trip and what would be expected of the U.S. teenagers. The trip was fully funded by JetBlue and the Red Sox. Participants were asked to fundraise, but if they couldn't reach their goal, it wasn't a deal breaker, he said. About 5 weeks before the trip, Greenia met with other U.S. teammates at an orientation session at Fenway Park, where he said he really got along based on them having the same interest. They also met with the 10 Dominican participants, and Greenia said, quote, "We all quickly got to know each other, and soon it felt as if we had known each other for a long time."
The community service project was building a home for a family in El Mamon, a town 30 minutes away from the baseball stadium. Greenia said he thought he knew what he was going to see when he went into the town, but he had no idea just how poor the community actually was. He described the home they had as a shack being held up by tree branches with a dirt floor and just a mattress for the family to sleep on. Many other families were in the same situation, according to Greenia. Even though the living conditions seemed not ideal, Greenia said that the most surprising thing was even though the family didn't have much, they still seemed happy.
Although the teens didn't always understand the language of their teammates over the course of the 2 weeks, Greenia said they learned that their love of the game of baseball and their understanding of the importance of community service can serve as a unifier for people of all backgrounds and cultures. Greenia said it was great to experience a different country's way of playing baseball. He said they're so passionate about playing in the Dominican Republic. For some of them, it's all they have. It's what they love. Nothing can change the love for baseball when you're in the Dominican Republic. The community aspect of the program, especially the home building, also had an impact on Greenia. He said he loved the construction part of the program, and his favorite part of the trip was the camaraderie of being together with a mixed group of kids from different backgrounds. He said, quote, "I love that we were all working towards the same goal of building a house together for a family in need. But it wasn't just building a house for a family. It was a house for the entire community to remember for the rest of their lives. They were so grateful just for our presence."
Well, obviously, we hear a lot of these kinds of stories of how sports can kind of transcend. And obviously, you and I being sports fans, we hear a lot of these kinds of stories. But it's great that that we were able to get this local tie and have a young local resident who was able to bring back a whole new perspective that hopefully he'll be able to share. He obviously shared it with us and with the community, but he'll be able to share it with his friends and many of the younger people of the population who probably, like him, don't have the full perspective of how poor and in need some of these areas of the world are.
Yeah, I think so, especially at such a young age to see something like this firsthand. You know, you learn to not take a lot of things you have for granted and realize, you know, there are people who he mentioned are living in worse conditions, but are still happy. So it's all about the outlook you have on life. And, you know, just at this, looking at this community service project as is, I know I've worked on a few community service projects having to build houses, not to this scale in a different country. But, you know, when you're working with people that you know, it doesn't even seem like work. So it's kind of rewarding in the end, too, because you're just doing a job for everybody else that you seem as a fun activity, but, you know, you're really helping somebody in need. So this is definitely a great thing that he did, and I'm sure other people will hopefully see this and want to do it in the future.
Yeah, I know I can't vouch for it myself, but my wife was part of a service trip to New Orleans to help families who had their homes devastated by Hurricane Katrina back a long time ago, probably before your memory, honestly.
Yeah.
And she still carries that experience with her to this day, and seeing the need and the devastation that happened there. So I'd imagine that this is going to be something that he'll carry with him as well for a long time. It's also great when you see these larger organizations taking part in these things. Obviously, the Red Sox have a presence in the Dominican Republic. I think a big part of that has to do with David Ortiz and his, the work that he's done as an ambassador for the Dominican Republic. But it's great that an organization and something that is as large as something like the Red Sox and the Fenway Sports Group has become, are using some of those resources to give back and not only help those in need, but give young people opportunities that they probably wouldn't have otherwise.
I agree. This is just a cool story and a great opportunity this kid took along with the other 9 members, and it's something that I'm sure he will cherish and hopefully take back to the community for others to enjoy or take part in the future.
And for our second topic, Chicopee and Westover Air Base hosted an electromagnetic pulse tabletop exercise to prepare for potential electromagnetic pulse events. An electromagnetic pulse attack, which is also known as an EMP attack, is a high-level pulse that could come naturally or from a nuclear weapon. It fries all electrical systems around it, like communication and power systems. Many department heads and representatives from different participating agencies took part in Chicopee's local emergency planning committee exercise. The 3-hour discussion and exercise was designed to identify the city of Chicopee and Westover Air Force Base's needs and participant roles in responding and managing response actions and policy during a catastrophic widespread power outage.
The joint exercise was the first of its kind, and some things it aimed to identify were the local impact of extended grid, regional collaboration solutions to minimize impact from an EMP incident on the region, critical infrastructure, share information with local jurisdictions and utilities to harden their grid from EMP and other threats, potential technologies that may be able to be implemented to help mitigate the situation, and identify what plans are in place for such an event and options for improvement. Colonel Greg Buchanan, 439th Airlift Wing, explained how important the exercise was for everyone to take part in. He said, quote, "We're one of the first to do this. I believe San Antonio has done it as well. There is interest in the Pentagon regarding this exercise. A lot of other entities are going to come in as we collectively look at this problem." Buchanan also mentioned a major general was scheduled to listen to the exercise, along with representatives from Homeland Security.
Participants were given a situation manual with a prompt, and the exercise utilized a dual-track discussion utilizing 2 separate breakout discussion groups. The module example provided a prompt that proposed the power had gone out across most of the nation, with the western states being spared from the outage. There is no radio or television stations, internet, or cable service available in the New England region. Some cell phones are still powered on, but there are not operational networks to all communications. Landline phones are down, most cars are out of service, stalled vehicles had gridlocked populated areas, there's low water pressure, failing water systems, the state of refrigerated and non-perishable goods is not good. The fuel and financial systems are down, forcing exchange to be cash or barter only.
Group A's focus was on how the region will fare without protection, and Group B was tasked with identifying what critical resources and planning steps they feel will most benefit the region to survive this incident. Group A responded to the exercise scenario with existing capabilities and resources, highlighting the challenges that would be ACE from EMP effects. Group B responded to the same exercise scenario, but were provided additional technology or resources such as EMP-hardened microgrid or other preparations which would allow the region to continue providing limited required services to the public. The goal was to discuss and develop an understanding of participating agency roles and responsibilities associated with support or response to a disaster within the region.
So when I first read about this, I was thinking, man, everything's cooked.
Yeah,
You think about how much we rely on, something as basic as your car running. And, we're talking about how that your car may not work. And, obviously refrigeration and simple things not even related to having a phone in your pocket or something like that. Basic comforts that we have are suddenly non-existent. And just the chaos that would ensue from something like that. So with that in mind, it seems incredibly important that entities, like the Pentagon and locally, local authorities and such, not being in chaos to try and help, maintain some kind of structure during these kinds of, I guess you'd call it once in a lifetime events.
Yeah, I mean, this exercise I was able to attend. I stayed for the first hour for the introduction. I was able to secure one of those module pamphlets that they were going through, and just reading through it, I mean, I got a bunch of anxiety and just thought, I've thought of, many times in the past where right before dinner, the power has gone out of my apartment complex. And I've panicked just for a few moments thinking, how am I going to get dinner? I got to get takeout, I got to drive. This is on a much bigger scale, My phone still worked. I still was able to drive. So just looking through the packet, seeing the module saying, well, let's see what would happen from month 2 through 6. I have a hard time believing everything will be fine in months 2 through 6. If something like this did happen naturally or by a threat from another country or something. So it was definitely an eye-opening exercise to see. And, I think it was definitely beneficial for a lot of people I talked to in the room. But it's something that, it's crazy to think about.
And the only thing that I can think of that comes even close to this scale that has happened even semi-recently was probably the tornado that obviously knocked out power for a substantial amount of the population. Took a long time to get back because the major transmission lines to the area were down. And I remember being here, not in this physical location, but being at the reminder offices with no power, trying to figure out how we were going to put a paper out with with no internet and no electricity and things like that, but we still had running water. We still had a sewer system that was working properly. We still had our cars that were working. We actually ran generators to run the computers and then drove on a disk, our layout down to the printer so that they could print the paper to get them out on time. So there were still facilities at our disposal and ways that we could work around the inconvenience of not having power. But just on that kind of scale where basically nothing works, it's just, how do you adapt? So, I think that's especially important for these organizations and these agencies to be on top of, even as far-fetched of a possibility this may be, that they're on top of it, because there's so much that we in our day-to-day lives are dependent on that it's hard to even wrap your head around how you would do without it, without the basic things that, reading through that list, are not available to you.
Yeah, exactly. And all the department heads there was a lot of representatives from Westover Air Base itself. Homeland Security was there, a few representatives from there as well, because, if something like this ever did happen, who are the residents and the world or the country really going to look to? And it's kind of the people in charge, at least on a bigger scale. And, if they don't know what to do in a situation like this, then everything is going to be chaos. So I think it was really important. You hope something like this never happens. It may never happen. But just so they can kind of be ready to see what to do in case of an emergency like this. Because, just like even the car is not working and roads being gridlocked, so you can't really drive on the roads. You would have to either go off-roading or something like that. But even same thing, having to use cash or a barter system only. I know I don't carry too much cash around. Everyone has their money in a bank, and what would you barter? So it was an interesting exercise that I'm interested to see going down the line if other communities see how this works and maybe try it themselves.
Now, and I'm not as familiar with this as I used to be, and I'm not sure where it stands now, but Westover for a long time was a very strategically located air base. And so it made it, especially during the Cold War and things like that, it made it not so much a target, but it was something that authorities had to be aware of, that because of its strategic importance to United States military operations, that this was something that was on the radar of those who would seek to harm America. I don't know how the operations, now as a reserve base, how that may have changed, but I think the fact that this is happening at Westover isn't a coincidence and is significant. It still shows, I think, that we do here in Western Massachusetts have a critical resource in Westover, serving worldwide.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about, because Colonel Buchanan himself did mention a few times how important this exercise was for the whole community to work together, and especially for his air base, because if communications are down, how can he communicate with getting some of his guys in the air, where to go, what they need, stuff like that. So it was very important, not only for the community, but you're right, for Westover Air Base itself.
I was just, as you were talking and we're talking about the communication aspect, it just popped into my head the movie Independence Day, where they ended up using Morse code, because it was the only thing that would work. Yeah. I don't know, if those are the kinds of things that they were going over, but it's really interesting, something as basic communication, how you'd really have to think about how that would work.
Exactly. And even just relying on a few things. If you have to rely on radios and stuff, I know not too many people have radios themselves. I don't. So it's like, how would you get the message out if people's phones and stuff don't work? So it was a eye-opening exercise for sure.
And we'll be right back after a few more short messages.
Since the founding of Reminder Publishing over 60 years ago, the Reminder has brought local businesses together with their customers through our advertising and coverage. Over the past 4 years, the Reminder has been adding to its reporting and expanding our readership, while other newspapers in the region, state, and country have scaled back or closed. We want local community journalism to thrive and grow, and are asking our readers and listeners to support and participate. The Reminder Press Club's mission is to ensure that local journalism is sustainable and leading healthy community discussions. The Reminder Press Club is a way for you to support the crucial work of professional reporters covering the vital stories in our community. Learn more about the Reminder Press Club or join at reminderpressclub.com. Are you planning your second act? Working on your bucket list? Investing for early retirement? If you've hit that point in life where time will soon be yours, let Prime Magazine be your guide. We're all about staying healthy and fit, keeping up with tech, traveling, local entertainment, managing finances, caring for your kids and elders, and much more. Pick up the latest copy of Prime Magazine every month. Prime, your best life now.
And we're back. For our third topic, we will be discussing a question regarding whether the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System test should continue to be a high school graduation requirement. The question will appear on Massachusetts ballots during the November 5th general election. If the question is approved by voters, then the MCAS will not be a graduation requirement for high school students, though the tests will still be given to gather data. Instead, graduation readiness would be determined by local districts' expectations, provided that those local expectations are informed by the framework and standards established by the state's Board of Education.
The ballot question landed on the 2024 election after the Massachusetts Teachers Association gathered over 130,000 signatures across the state from those who support eliminating the MCAS as a graduation requirement. The MTA officially backed the question in an announcement in August 2023. Throughout their advocacy, the MTA has argued that the MCAS is a limiting tool that only measures some of the standards established by curriculum frameworks. According to a document provided by the MTA's Center for Education Policy and Practice, the 10th grade English Language Arts test does not address any speaking or listening standards, and only 3 out of 10 writing standards are covered. They also said in their argument for the ballot question that MCAS only covers 43% of the 32 anchor standards in English Language Arts.
Deb McCarthy, the vice president of the MTA and a 5th grade teacher of 25 years, said that the MCAS is an inequitable test that fails to accommodate students with learning disabilities. She said, MCAS isn't a standard, it's an assessment. And we do assessments all the time, from September through June. And we believe that our students need to be measured on the process of these 10 months and not a one-time event. Despite overwhelming support to eliminate the requirement from the largest teachers association in the state, there are some opponents to the question, including a statewide broad coalition of teachers, parents, education advocates, and business groups called Protect Our Kids' Future. No on question 2.
The coalition argues that without the MCAS graduation requirement, the basic level of competence educators expect of our students would be weakened, resulting in 300-plus different and unequal standards for high school graduation across the state. Cynthia Arguso, a junior high school math teacher in Agawam, said, "If we take away the graduation requirement, we have literally no standardized requirement in which to graduate students. If we do that, then all districts in the state will have their graduation requirements, and that's not a level playing field." Arguso has been an educator for over 25 years and said she has worked with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for many years to approve questions that go on the test. She said that the process in which a question arrives on the test takes 2 to 3 years because it goes through many different committees, including a bias and sensitivity committee, to make sure the questions are valid.
Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey and Massachusetts Secretary of Education Patrick Tutwiler also oppose eliminating the MCAS test as a requirement. The MCAS question is one of 5 ballot questions for this year's election. So I'm going to preface this as I prefaced an earlier conversation we had regarding education by stating that my wife is an educator. She is a member of a teachers union, and I believe that her teachers union also supports this. My thoughts on this subject are mine. They are not representative of my wife or any teachers association or union or anything like that. Truthfully, some of these thoughts that I've had are thoughts that I had about the MCAS long before I even met my wife. So I, for one, completely understand why there's the desire to get rid of the graduation requirement. It always, to me, felt like an unnecessary burden on students and teachers. I certainly understand the argument about the need to standardize, but at the same time, I believe it was State Senator Jake Oliveira who pointed out that Massachusetts is the only state that currently requires a standardized test for graduation. So I feel like if districts are working within the frameworks of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and the MCAS is still being used as a tool to make sure that they are following those standards, then that's not a major concern or shouldn't be a major concern. Granted, there's always going to be differences in the way that one district approaches things versus another, but usually it's all within a certain framework. It's not all that dissimilar to the cities and towns in Massachusetts. They have to operate within certain frameworks, and they may go about things in a different way, but at the end of the day, the idea is you have a balanced budget through which you provide services to your community. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, without telling anybody how they should vote on this question, from my perspective, I understand both arguments, but I feel like there's a way for the MCAS to still be an effective tool for teaching and for assessing a district's performance without directly tying that to a student's ability to graduate, especially when they take this test in 10th grade.
Mm-hmm. MCAS and the whole discussion, and if you want to call controversy around it, was foreign to me before I started working for this paper a couple years ago, covering Western Massachusetts, because growing up in New York, Long Island, we didn't have MCAS, obviously, and we had standardized tests, but it never was the end-all be-all for a graduation requirement if you pass or didn't pass it. You had your end-of-the-year regents and tests, but you didn't always have to pass them to get graduation requirements. You just sometimes didn't get credit for that specific class or credits going forward. So I couldn't imagine having to go through school and having just one test determine, if I can graduate or not. That definitely seems very stressful. So I do agree with you. It could be a tool to, gather a lot of data, like they said, going forward. But it seems like, it's definitely very stressful. And also just looking at, what the vice president of MTA said, mentioning that some of the curriculum isn't even covered in the MCAS, is something that shows that it does need some work.
Yeah, and I could be mistaken in this, but I believe that there's an ELA and a math requirement for graduation. There's also a science test as part of the MCAS, but that isn't part of a graduation requirement. So it's a really narrow focus in and of itself. The fact that we have in a lot of places, that because of the way that curriculum is structured, because of these requirements, things like social studies, civics, and things like that are neglected a bit, is just as concerning to me as as the possibility of there being some minor inequity in the way different districts assess their student success, towards graduation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point I didn't even think about either, is if there are other tests for science and social studies, but they're not required for graduation if you pass them. But they focus so much on math and English language arts, which is actually interesting. I never thought about, because, every time in school I'll say I was not the strongest math student, and I was always one of those kids that always said, I'm never going to use this in the future. And when am I going to use this? So, to focus so much just on those two is interesting.
Now, I will age myself here in that I graduated high school before MCAS was a thing. My sister was my younger sister was one of the first to have a graduation requirement. And actually, she ended up going to a different school. She ended up not going to the public schools because at the time it was also so new. So there was a lot of uncertainty with it. But I think that anxiety that existed then never went away. I can remember too, and again, this doesn't hold as much weight as it once did, but SATs used to be a really big deal. And that wasn't even a requirement for graduation. That was just, hey, if I want to go to a certain college or something like that, I need to do well on this. I couldn't imagine the stress as a student of worrying about, even if you're a good student, even the amount of stress and anxiety that is tied with this. I can't tell you how many incredibly intelligent people I know who also are classic overthinkers.
Yes, yeah.
and I can just imagine what that is like for a student. And then on a separate note, I also kind of wonder for those who are, and some of the people who are fighting for this are teachers. And there are people who, as has been noted, people who help frame these questions to make sure that they are assessing what they're supposed to assess. So I'm not trying to discount their work or discredit their work. My question is, the argument being, well, we're not going to have, it's going to lessen the standards. Just like, don't you have faith in your teachers to assess the capabilities of their students? And if you're saying no, well, then that's a problem in and of itself.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a problem with the messaging there for those who are opposed to doing away with this as well.
Yeah, that's a good point because, they do give assessments and tests after usually each curriculum or each unit, trying to judge where each student is. There's multiple units throughout each year in each subject, and usually at the end there's a quiz throughout and then a big test to show and make sure you know everything along the way. And, it seems like those assessments are just good enough. And I mean, going back a little to your point about some people who are really intelligent, I was just thinking of a few people I know who are very, very smart, probably smarter than me, but when it came down to the tests, they were overthinking, thinking they were getting tricked. And, you can't really judge just how smart or how much knowledge they have based on the test, because sometimes the smartest are not the best test takers. So you can't put it all on just one standardized test.
Now, and you mentioned not being a strong math student.
Yes.
I also was not a strong math student, and that's why we're in the profession we're in.
I was just about to say that.
The joke's on us because now we deal with budgets and budget figures and all this kind of stuff all the time. So who says that fate doesn't have a sense of humor?
For our fourth topic, during the Ware Select Board meeting on September 17th, the board received positive updates on the status of the Mary Lane Hospital demolition project and the Gilbert Trust Fund. Town Manager Stuart Beckley provided an update about the meeting he had with State Rep Todd Schmola, Dr. Howard Triesch from the Hospital Review Committee, Bay State CEO Peter Benko, and his team regarding the Mary Lane Hospital demolition. In a follow-up email from Bay State CEO Peter Benko, he agreed to put a halt on demolition of Mary Lane Hospital buildings that was scheduled for October 17th while the town continues to find another provider. Benko stated, quote, "We will be flexible on the timeline for demolition of the buildings on the Mary Lane campus to afford a reasonable period of time for interested parties to evaluate potential development."
Benko also announced that Bay State would work toward returning health care in some form to Ware and will work with the town on a memorial. Benko said, quote, "We are committed to working with the Ware Historical Commission to identify an appropriate, meaningful, and visible way to memorialize Mary Lane and its place in the history of Ware. We are committed to exploring ways to address the healthcare needs, including a physical Bay State presence in Ware and the surrounding communities on our own, with a partner or through a third-party relationship. Bay State will continue to work with the Attorney General's office regarding the Gilbert Trust to benefit health and healthcare in the community." Benko added, quote, "Those funds must absolutely be used to meet the intent of the trust and benefit health and healthcare in the community. We will continue the open and transparent communication developed at our meeting, including initiating regularly scheduled meetings with organizations who are similarly committed to addressing all the issues related to the Mary Lane transition."
Now, I was curious viewing this meeting and writing the article, and I wanted to do a little background on the Gilbert Trust, and the Ware Town website provides a history. So the hospital was a product of a trust set up by Lewis Gilbert. It explains that after Lewis Gilbert passed away in 1919, he left his large South Street home and property to the Ware Visiting Nurse and Hospital Association, along with $5,000 in trust to endow the hospital so long as it, quote, be forever known as the Mary Lane Hospital in memory of his wife. Gilbert's will stated that his endowment he wished to allow the Ware Visiting Nurse and Hospital Association to, quote, suitably and more effectively care for the sick, especially of the town of Ware and the village of Gilbertville, unquote, and to provide hospital grounds and buildings where the sick may be properly cared for graciously or at a reasonable charge according to the circumstance of each. According to the history, in February 2020, the Gilbert Trust contained nearly $6 million. Beckley provided an update of the trust today and said, "In terms of the trust, I think they are coming to a point where they're going to be discussing needs of what the trust should be used for, how much that trust is, how large the trust, and the next steps, and what will be the needs, and conveying that to the Attorney General and Bay State to get an agreement with them as well as the trustee."
Banco concluded that Bay State will continue the open and transparent communications developed with Beckley and Smolla, including regularly scheduled meetings with them and organizations committed to issues related to Mary Lane. The Friends of Mary Lane Hospital will have a meeting with the Attorney General's office on September 26th. That's the day after we're recording this and the day before this episode will drop. Bay State will also be attending to discuss the trust and willingness to work with the community. Resident Stephen Granlin, an outspoken critic of Bay State Health and its plans for the Mary Lane campus, was at the select board meeting to discuss the updates and upcoming meeting. He said, "We're hopefully not only in the case of the Gilbert Trust money, but there's a lot of other money, trusts and donations, and bequeaths that eventually it would be nice if the money was used for its original intent rather than having been spent in Springfield as it has been for close to 20 years. I'm pleased to see there's been a little bit of change in direction, and there is some headway, at least in the area of the Gilbert Trust money, and of course we'd like it to be under local control."
One thing presented by the hospital review committee was the strong desire and need of the community was to have a healthcare facility. Granlin said he will report back to the select board after the meeting on September 26th.
Now, obviously, this is something that has been ongoing and something you have been covering at length
Yes.
for the reminder. I feel like there's a lot of corporate speak in here. I think that this feels like a bone that Mary Lane or that Bay State is throwing to the supporters of the Mary Lane property and making sure that things are done properly with that property. But they're not going to hold off forever. And they've had a really, really hard time finding interested parties who want to use that facility or that land because they're not going to use that facility regardless. I don't think that anybody would come in and use that entire facility. So likely anything that would happen with that land would be a demolition of some kind and a new facility. And they've had a really hard time finding somebody who would be willing or interested to do that, at least to the scale that they're looking for.
Yeah, this just seems kind of like a stall tactic of sorts because, covering this meeting and past meetings, Granlund is usually present at them to discuss updates to the Mary Lane Hospital. I also have looked at, his Facebook because he provides a lot of information on the ongoing attempts to find someone to maybe develop on the land or, at least save it in a sense. But, most recently before this meeting too, he met with the select board to talk about ways to get a cease and desist or an injunction against Bay State for violating the no demolition order on this property right now too. And all of these things seem to just line up with they're just waiting for somebody in, the final hour to buy the land or at least develop it so it doesn't get destroyed.
And I credit the people who have been working hard on this. A lot of their interest is simply making sure that right is done by them, and making sure that they have the resources to maintain healthy lives where they live. And there's certainly a lot of merit to what they're doing and what they're fighting for. This is really a case of, corporate healthcare versus the needs of a community, and it's really putting a spotlight in a lot of ways into the failings of our healthcare system. It was basically just deemed not economically viable to keep a hospital there. So without any real plan on how they're going to serve that population and make sure that it's a healthy and thriving population, they just up and left.
Yeah.
I don't think that this is as significant a step as some people might in terms of the demolition delay was supposed to expire in October, and they said, no, we'll take some extra time. I don't think that Bay State is in a real hurry to offload this property. They just started the process, and now they're getting pushback, and so they're not really trying to charge this over the finish line. You know, I mean, at this point, they, you know, the biggest thing for them with the building is liability. So I don't know, especially because there doesn't seem to be a real thirst or a real hunger from any developers to use this property for a medical facility. I don't think that Bay State is in a huge hurry here. So I think that Bay State felt that this was a small piece that they could give the community, hoping that it would calm things down a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with that, because there was just a lot of vague statements. There was no concrete ideas. It was just them saying they're willing to meet, they're willing to talk, and just show that they're open to possibly listening to some ideas. But they're, you know, this property's been like this for some time now, and there hasn't been any concrete ideas in place besides demolishing the buildings. So, you know, I to a point you mentioned, obviously having healthcare in the community just being taken away from you, I do applaud the community members for continuing to fight for, at least regardless of their attachment to these buildings, just having healthcare in the area, which is another main focus. But some of these buildings, I know Granlund mentioned, I think he met with either the city inspector or the town building inspector, something like that. Most of these buildings were gutted completely. They said it was for asbestos, and, you know, if anyone did want to take over some of these buildings, you have to completely redo a lot of the inside. So, you know, it is tough to see someone taking over, you know, these land and buildings and using them again.
Well, and that was something I recall from a meeting that I actually covered where the building inspector spoke about this at length. Is there was a lot of concern because people saw work being done at the property, and they thought that it was demolition. And the definition of demolition for the intents and purposes of the demolition restriction are not the same as, you know, like, there are things that they can still do, asbestos abatement and things like that. Those are still allowed even when there is the demolition order. So a lot of that was going on. And I think that there's something to be said that if that abatement has already happened, it makes it easier for someone else to move in. It makes it a little bit more palatable because then you don't have to go in and abate the property.
True.
But at the same time, I think that just the sheer size of the facility there would make it hard for somebody else to want to come in and assume the entire property. So that's my kind of assumption. Maybe I'm jumping too much of an assumption. But if Bay State was just like, you know what, this is too much for us to deal with, you know, and financially this doesn't make sense, I kind of wonder where they're going to find that person who would want to, you know, take over the facility altogether. So there's, of course, the chance, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't think that saving the building is. I think that the Historical Commission has had a pretty realistic view on this, where they've been trying to do what they can to preserve the historic aspects of the building and make sure that the hospital is memorialized. So I think that they've had the most grounded approach here. Granted, they also have a very narrow charge, you know, but I've found their approach to be kind of refreshingly grounded, you know, whereas I think that there's a lot of emotion from the people who are fighting for this, and understandably so. But I think the emotion sometimes kind of clouds the issue. And when you're looking at it from a realistic standpoint, on top of everything else, $6 million sounds like a lot of money for this trust.
Yes.
When you're running a healthcare facility, $6 million is nothing.
Yeah.
You know, so it's hard from that perspective as well.
Exactly. And, you know, just this has to, you know, from the Historical Commission, the Friends of Mary Lane, everyone working on this project. I mean, as of the select board meeting, that was September 17th, in exactly 1 month, was plans to start the demolition of the rest of the land or the buildings. So that had to feel like a win because time was running out. But I'm interested to see how the meeting goes on September 26th and, what the report back from there is. Because if there's no concrete plans and it's the same thing saying they're willing to work together, like you said, Bay State probably isn't going to wait too long after that to get going with their plans.
And for our final topic, we'll talk about a partnership that will explore the history of immigrants from a now largely forgotten part of Ireland that settled in the city of Springfield. The city and the Springfield Museums have partnered with the Office of Public Works of Ireland and the Blaskett Centre, a heritage museum in Dunquin, Ireland, to put a spotlight on former residents of the Blaskett Islands and their descendants. The Blaskett Islands are the westernmost point of Ireland, just off the coast of the Dingle Peninsula in County Kerry. The islands were evacuated in 1953 due to a combination of harsh winters, declining population, and difficult emergency access and communication. Many families that lived on the small group of islands are now settled in Springfield. Irish immigrants settled in areas of Springfield, particularly the Hungry Hill neighborhood. Newly immigrated families moved into neighborhoods of relatives and others of shared backgrounds, and the community grew.
Springfield Museums curator Elizabeth Kapp took part in a trip to Ireland organized by Explore Western Massachusetts. From those experiences and through working with Blaskett Center, the exhibit Gone Now to Springfield, celebrating the legacy of Blaskett Islands, was created. On September 17th, Springfield Mayor Dominic Sarno and Congressman Richard Neal were among several local public tourism and museum officials who met with County Kerry Mayor Brandon Fitzgerald, County Kerry's General Counsel Sheila Fitzgerald, former state rep and Irish Culture Center Board Sean Carhillan, and Dingle Peninsula Tourism Alliance representative Caroline Boland to celebrate the exhibit. As part of the celebration, they honored Springfield resident Maria Kearney Shea, the last living person from the Blaskett Islands. While she emigrated to the United States in 1948, her parents still lived on the islands where they were evacuated. Sarno presented Shea with a proclamation of the Maria Kearney Shea Day.
Now, around Western Massachusetts, Holyoke is usually thought of as the Irish capital of Western Massachusetts, of course, with the St. Patrick's Parade and everything that goes around that. But Springfield has had a pretty substantial Irish population, throughout its history, and truthfully, Springfield has been a city of immigrants. You see these same kind of immigrant communities like in the city's south end with the Italian community and Hispanic and Puerto Rican heritage, specifically in the north end. So you've seen this in Springfield a lot. It's interesting to see a little bit of where these people actually came from, because you're I'm Irish, okay, and truthfully, a lot of people within these communities can still trace their roots back. So there are people in these like Ms. Kearney, could trace herself back to the Blaskett Islands. But for those outside of those communities, this is an interesting window into the kind of what has been a real part of the history of Springfield. It's something that I don't really I've never really had a connection to because my ancestry is so muddled. I know a few of the the major threads of my heritage. The way that some of these people can trace back, where their great grandmother lived, it's really fascinating. So to actually be able to capture some of this and exhibit it in the museum is pretty cool.
Yeah, looking at this as well, I mean, just reading it, seeing her saying, or the article saying she's the last living person from the Blasket Islands, I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, imagine having all that history with you. I know they have the exhibit where they're going to, have a lot of people, the culture, all those things demonstrated, but there's only so much you can read and maybe hear audio tapes about. I mean, she has a lot of the history herself, so it's cool to be able to, like you said, know your whole ancestry line, and being able to just kind of celebrate that and have a day after her is even cool as well.
Well, that's a great point on your part, is she probably has, and many other members of the community have stories that they tell. Being able to immortalize that a little bit through the recording of it through the Springfield Museums and this partnership really is going to make sure that history endures and it doesn't fade as as a verbal history.
Yeah, no, and I think this is really cool. And come every September 17th, I'm sure people will think about this, and I think people should definitely check out the exhibit itself as long as it's still there, because this is something that not too many people probably know about.
And one thing that the Springfield Museums in general does really well is it does try to capture the essence of the city and the communities that make up the city. The city itself is a conglomeration of buildings and things like that. But what really makes it a community is all of the people that are in it, and part of that is their stories and the stories of their ancestors who came here. So I think that the Springfield Museums has done a great job and has made a concerted effort in making sure that those stories are told, and that is a credit to the staff there and their vision.
Of course.
And that wraps up another episode of So That Reminds Me.
Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with our next episode.
Thanks for listening to So That Reminds Me, produced by Western Massachusetts news source Reminder Publishing. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, find the latest news at thereminder.com, and follow Reminder Publishing on Instagram at Reminder Publishing, on X at The Reminder MA, and on Facebook. Reminder Publishing, we are hometown news.